Welcome aboard, folks. I'm Stephen Malkowich, your captain on this adventure called Ship of Fools. I'm a fool. Lucky for you, I'm not sailing solo. Join me and a boatload of people, all just trying to make sense of this crazy world. It's a fabulous mess, and you're invited.
I'd like to welcome everyone to Ship of Fools, where wit meets wisdom. Today we have a very special guest in the studio, John Rustad, who has been so kind to grace us with his presence. I know you probably hate hearing that. But before we get into that, I want to make a statement here about the and I'm going to read verbatim here because it's taken me some time to try and wrap my head around what this podcast means to me. And Ship of Fools is where wit meets wisdom. It's not an interview. It's a real conversation. It's a space for curious minds, honest dialogue, and the belief that everyone has a story worth hearing. Here it's not about having all the answers. It's about being willing to say, I don't know, and caring enough to find out. Because when we truly listen, we don't just understand each other. We strengthen our communities, our perspective, and our path forward. This is the intersection where wit meets wisdom. That's what this podcast is about. Okay? So I needed to say that, and I'm going to try and say that before everyone, because I've been trying to, various machinations in my head. What the hell am I trying to do here? Okay? Aside from talking to people that I find interesting. Okay? And it's been a journey of, a lot of people, first of all, saying, who the hell are you? To the point of going, okay, you're in the newspaper business. Who cares? And I literally mean that because, the newspaper business has taken we've taken a shit kicking, that's for sure. But people still do read the newspaper. And I'm not suggesting that we are the news. The news happens 24/7 and things have changed. But without further ado, I wanted to get into it.
And it's actually, when you're talking about the newspaper business, I obviously, first of all, thank you for having me on.
Thank you, John.
I enjoy doing this type of conversation and try to make it as entertaining as I can. But I think about, the newspaper business, the media business in general. The world has changed so dramatically. And at some point in the future, there's going to be a public demand for authenticity of news source. And because right now it's almost gone, the whole media world, because the advertising world, the pay world, the online stuff has changed things so dramatically. People go to all different types of sources now to get information. But are they getting real information?
Is it true?
Just take, for example, the war between Iran and the United States. There's just a flood of information out there. What's true, what's not?
Yeah.
You just don't know. And so you glom onto the things that you think are true, or maybe you glom onto things that you want to hear. How do you get to a place where you have something that can be authentic, actually that you can trust? Mm-hmm. And you certainly can't put that in the hands of government.
No,
because they put spin on everything, right?
Exactly.
I have been in government. I know what it is. So how do you get to that place? 1,000%. And at some point, there's going to be a demand for that.
1,000%.
And I don't know when that's going to be, but that will be sort of a change that will be coming.
Okay. So what is different with and with this conversation that I want to have with you, John, is one thing that frustrates me is when you begin to have a conversation with someone in a podcast type format, the host or whoever is doing the leading the discussion does not give the guest the appropriate time to tell the audience a little bit about themselves and who the hell they are. Okay, because I'll use this as an example. I'll watch, and I don't watch it as much as I used to. I went down the rabbit hole with Joe Rogan, but I would watch Joe Rogan and I click on it and I go, who the hell is that? Like, who's this person? And then I would watch it for 5 minutes and go, okay, I'm not interested in that person, but I'd like to find out about who this person is and why Joe figures it's important to have this person on and to talk, aside from talking about, MMA and having a fight night on the White House lawn, like whatever. But right. You know what I'm saying. So what I want to do is I want to start off with John Rustad and a brief introduction. Explain this good faith conversation between two people that love British Columbia. We can agree on that. Let's just talk about your early life. Let's talk about where you were born and
it's funny when people ask me, I just say, look, I'm just John. I mean, I grew up born and raised in Prince George. Grew up in a forest family. Spent a lot of my time in and around the forest sector. Ran my own company, doing forestry consulting, particularly from a technology side of things, geographic information systems before GIS was all automated.
What does that mean? I'm going to ask you some. I'm going to interrupt you and ask you some stupid questions.
Yeah. So
what does that mean?
Geographic information system. So essentially what that is database mapping, management, analysis.
Okay.
And so I did everything from timber supply analysis to forest development plans to watershed analysis to, that type of work.
Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
And so I did a lot of work with the forest sector. Obviously, I had an office in Houston, BC, an office in Prince George as well. And so at one point during the 90s, I was looking at this, and it was frustrating, of course, because I saw where the province was going, and I was quite, I guess you could say, upset. I was looking at it thinking, I'm running my company. I could go across the border in Alberta and immediately have a 15% increase in my revenue, simply because of taxation and regulation and the challenges of doing business in British Columbia. So at that point in the year 2000, or I should maybe take a step back, got married in 1995. I met the love of my life, and we've been happily married ever since. I sat down in the year 2000 with Kim, and I asked her, I said, what do you think about moving to Calgary? And so we had a long, straight up conversation about relocating to Alberta because I was so unhappy with where things were going in BC. And ultimately, I, of course, had my business. I have a woodlot license. I had some other business interests and property interests and things like that I was involved in. And my whole family was in Prince George and in British Columbia. Her parents were in Prince George. And we thought about it and thought, I didn't really want to get driven out of the province. And so that left me with two choices. I either had to just live with it, or I had to actually get involved and try to change it. And so that ultimately is what led me into politics, because politics was never an ambition of mine. And I had this huge phobia of public speaking. Like, it was just unbelievably crazy. I would have a meeting with 5 clients, and I know them all well and friends, and would sit down and have scotch with them or whatever the case may be. And I would have a meeting with them, and I get the classic, the weak knees and the clammy hands and the whole bit, right? Anyway, so I decided I would go into politics, and that then shifted. So at that point, I started shutting down my company, heading towards politics, got involved with the BC Liberals at the time. They asked me to do this, or some of the people in the party asked me to do this. So I ran and became a school trustee, did that for 3 years. And I was really thinking about doing another term as a school trustee because I really enjoyed that work. And the school board chair at the time sat down with me and said, look, 26 years earlier, he had a chance to run provincially, and he decided the timing wasn't right for him, and he never got another chance. There's only been, just over 1,000 people in BC's history that have ever been in MLA. Mm-hmm. And so a riding opened up, and the folks within the organization, the BC Liberal organization of Prince George, pushed me hard, particularly a fellow named John Scarsbrook. And so I said, okay, I'll run. And so I ran for the nomination in 2004, won that nomination. I've been serving in provincial politics ever since 2005.
So now let's get into we're gonna, I guess, this whole political thing evolved, to say the least. One of the things I'm going to I'll make reference, because I'm a Manitoba boy, born and bred in the prairies. You could put a dark blue suit on a monkey, and I was voting for that. Like, I'm a conservative. True. I got been a card-carrying member of the federal and the provincial party. Now, there wasn't one here for a long time here. There wasn't in BC.
The last time a conservative party won an election and formed a government was 1927.
Yeah.
All right. So it's been a long time.
So I always, what struck me as odd, John, was in 1994, 93, 94, when I moved here from Winnipeg, being a political hack. And I was fortunate enough because of my, I'm not going to say because I'm so smart. It was my dad's political connections. I got to work in Ottawa for 2 summers for Brian Mulroney, which was interesting. It was great. I loved it. I just loved it. And at that time, I was silly enough to think I wanted to be a lawyer.
I know somebody else. That can tell that same story.
And
served in Ottawa for a couple of years, and actually went and got a law degree. So
and go, hey, wait a second here. But I never understood coming here. I did understand that the Social Credit Party was affiliated with the Conservative Party, that we shared the same resources because I did work on Jean Charest's campaign, doing some work and that kind of thing. But I never understood why there was never a Conservative Party, a provincial BC Conservative Party. So, until, just let me finish this thought, until this last provincial election. And then I saw why. Because I was actively involved in it, and I have my own. There's just this inability to play in the same sandbox. And that's
some challenges there.
Challenge, challenges that you're putting it mildly.
So we'll talk just a second about history. And in British Columbia, like I say, back in prior to the 1900s, there was no political parties. It was just people elected as independents, and they either declared themselves to be part of government or part of opposition. And in 1903, there was a change because there was elections every 6 months to 2 years, which people just said, this is crazy, we can't keep doing this. So there's a change, and that's when political parties were introduced. And so the Conservative Party in British Columbia is actually the oldest political party in BC. It was the first party to be founded and governed for many years. Up until the First World War, and then things started changing, and then the BC Liberals came on the scene.
What happened?
So it just, the way politics is in BC, various parties. And so ultimately the two parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals, kind of went back and forth and back and forth. And then the Liberals really took over starting in the 30s and governed all the way through into the 40s, through the 40s, I should say. But there was this rise of the CCF, which was which is what the NDP used to be called. I can't remember what CCF stands for at the moment.
Confederation of
whatever it is. In any case, so there was such a concern at the time in the late 40s that these guys were actually going to win government in BC. So they actually changed the election laws and implemented what's called the alternative vote, which is preferential balloting.
Explain that.
So what ended up happening is the Conservatives and the Liberals were fighting. Obviously, the coalition had completely fallen apart. They're fighting it out. And there was a fellow named W.A.C. Bennett.
Yes.
Who, along with a lady, her last name was Ralston, they left the coalition and became independents. W.A.C. Bennett actually tried to take over the leadership of the Conservative Party, and they wouldn't have him. So he created a new party called the Social Credit Party.
Okay.
And then, so now there's this three-way split between the Liberals and the Conservatives and this uprising Social Credit Party. This is why they implemented the alternative vote, the preferential ballot. So in the election in 1952, nobody could get enough votes to win. The Social Credit Party was in first place in enough ridings where they were everybody's second choice, whether it was the CCF or the Liberals or Conservatives, because they all hated each other, but the Social Credits were okay.
Okay.
So the Social Credit won 19 seats and the CCF won 18 seats, and then there was a handful of the others. So W.A.C. Bennett became the premier, and immediately got rid of the alternative vote and brought the Liberals and Conservatives in under the Socreds, and then ran that party for 20 years. Okay. In terms of it. But that was sort of the history of what happened to the Conservatives. Then in the 70s, there was an attempt to resurrect the Conservatives and the Liberals, for that matter, which is why the coalition fell apart in 72. The NDP won for the first time in BC's history, and that was so horrible that everybody came back together. However, there was I think it was an election in 1977 or somewhere in that range. That was the last time a Conservative actually got elected in BC.
Okay.
And then they folded and came back in as part of the Social Credit Party. But since then, the party's always been around, but it's never elected anybody.
Okay. So let's rise to a political the stature that you achieved on the political front. It began, you said, in Prince George at the school trustee level. You obviously were approached to run for the Liberals. I'm correct.
The BC Liberals, yeah.
The BC Liberals.
Yeah.
What year was that?
My
What
wife,
year was that?
used to call them the basically conservative Liberals.
The basically conservative Liberals. That's good. That's a good one. That's a good one.
And I had to use that line a lot in my writing
Basically conservative Liberals.
because my writing is certainly not
Sure,
liberal, right?
That's right.
Anyway, it just is what
Good
it
way
is.
to get shot up there saying that. So you were approached, you ran, and you won. Okay.
Yes.
What year are we talking about?
So that was 2005 was the 2004 is when the nomination was. 2005 was the provincial election. So
Okay. And who was the leader of the Liberal Party at that time?
so that was Gordon Campbell.
Gordon Campbell.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Gordon Campbell, I would say is a conservative. He kind of lost his way with the carbon tax and, a bunch of other things that he started to do. But, I think history will certainly look favorably on him. He was a builder.
Yeah.
He was somebody who really was focused on wanting to get things done. And, every leader has the different styles. Everybody has their flaws and things that will stand out as highlights. But Gordon, I think, will be treated well in the history books.
I believe that too. I think that in the when I look at from like I have a unique perspective in that I came out here in 1994, I believe, and I was fortunate enough to come out here during Expo on the Challenger and hand out pins, saying I was a tourism ambassador. It was kind of a colossal waste of federal money. I'll admit that. But I came out here during Expo when I was going to university because I was working in Ottawa. That was kind of cool. My parents did come out here. Expo opened up the world to Vancouver. And
I remember
British
coming
Columbia.
down to Vancouver Expo, and it was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
It was phenomenal, and it does. These sort of things do put British Columbia or Canada, on the stage. Whether it's Expo or whether it's Olympics, these types of things can be really building a brand awareness, particularly from a tourism perspective.
So I'm going to now. I don't want to get mired in the detail because we could be here for 5 hours.
I'll try to be concise. It's not one of my strong suits. Okay?
But you were able to come within inches of forming government.
Yes,
you were. Okay. You rose like the phoenix rising from the ashes. Okay.
Yeah, it is quite a story actually.
And then, excuse my language, then it all went for shit.
Yeah.
Okay. And what happened?
So I'll walk you through that period. And when Kevin Falcon took over the leadership of the BC Liberals, obviously I was co-chairing the leadership campaign for Ellis Ross. And Kevin won, and I'm like, okay, Kevin, look, I'm not going to cause any problems for you. I'll just do the job. And so he left me as critic for forests, and I went through. There was a problem that the federal government introduced called the Farm Emissions Reduction Strategy. And it was all part of this climate change stuff, right? They basically wanted to stop cows from farting and belching because it was causing too much CO2.
What was it called again? The Farm
Emissions Reduction Strategy.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, exactly. It was this white paper that they put out, and so this
Who
thing.
put this paper out?
This was Trudeau.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. Anyway, so this it basically wanted to reduce the use of nitrogen-based fertilizer.
Okay.
And stop, trying to move away from the cattle industry, trying to stop, cows from contributing to global emissions. Which, we can go there if you want, but
no, I don't want to go.
That's
there.
a whole hour.
I don't want to talk about that.
In any case, so I wanted to have this conversation in caucus because this was going to hurt my riding. This was crazy. We needed to have a response to this. And so I tried to have the conversation. It kept getting put off. It was supposed to be during the summer. Then it got put off again. And so finally I thought, okay, well, screw it. I'm going to start having this conversation online. So I posted a single post from the former founder of Greenpeace. And it was just a question of the role of CO2 and a few other things. Anyway, I didn't think anything of it because I thought, well, this will just start a conversation. That was on a Sunday. On a Wednesday, my phone lights up, and I was taking time off. This was in August. Thursday was my birthday in August. So on that Wednesday, my phone lit up, and I didn't answer it. So that night, I looked at it and went, oh, okay, there's a problem here. So I sent a note to Kevin and arranged a phone call for the next day. So the next day, I called him, and he said, well, you got to take that tweet down. I'd forgotten about it. I said, what tweet? He said, that the tweet, about the climate stuff. And I said, tweet? I didn't put on a tweet. Yeah, the retweet. Oh, the retweet that I had done, because it wasn't even anything I originally put out there. And I told him, look, we got to have this conversation. He said, look, we have to be leaders in fighting climate change. We can't have anything that goes against the narrative. And I said, look, this is going to hurt my riding. I was elected to represent my riding. That's what I'm supposed to do. He said, you either take it down or you're going to get kicked out of caucus. And I said, look, I'm not taking it down. He hung up on me. 15 minutes later, I was kicked out of caucus. And so that left me thinking, okay, what do I do? Now I'm sitting as an independent. And I sat with my wife and had a long conversation about it. And I said, well, I've got options, right? I could think about, other levels of politics, or I could just retire, go back to the private sector, whatever the case may be. And my wife said, why did you get involved in politics? I said, well, because we needed to change things. Mm-hmm. And she said, so what's changed? I said, well, we still have lots of problems. And she said, well, you've got to stay involved. You should choose to stay involved in this. And I said, well, as an independent, I can't really change things. And she said, well, then why don't you look at other options? So that's when I started actually looking at what to do next. And so stayed an independent for a number of months. I actually explored the idea of resurrecting the Social Credit Party. And there's 4 people that were sort of controlling the Social Credit Party, the name. They keep it alive so that no one can take it and kind of run with it. And so I tried to talk to them, and they refused. They weren't interested. And so at that point, then I moved over and started having serious conversations with the folks that were running the Conservative Party at the time.
Okay.
And ultimately decided to join them. And that was in February of 2023.
2023.
And by the end of March of 2023, I took over the leadership. And of course, 18 months later, we had the election. Mm-hmm. And so I took a party that basically didn't exist. And but it was... It was really the mood in the public, right? Uh-huh. People wanted change. Mm-hmm. They weren't happy with what had happened with the BC Liberals over the years, all the kind of issues. I mean, every political party builds up baggage, right?
Yes.
They weren't happy with what's going on with the NDP, so this actually created a window of opportunity. And so that's the path that I went on. And of course, there's lots of things we could get into mm-hmm. associated with that.
So you establish you resurrect the BC Conservative Party. Okay. And the next, your next hurdle is there's going to be an election. Okay. We know that there's got to be an election.
Well, there's going to be an election in 2024, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or earlier. So you've got to field candidates.
Yes. And that was the biggest challenge, because ultimately you got a party that has only attracted the fringe for decades and decades. How do you create that to be mainstream? And if I was looking at, we were rising in the polls, and we were around 50-50 between us and the BC Liberals at the time, and scrambling around trying to convince people to run. It wasn't a matter of people lining up and having nomination meetings. I was just trying to find anybody to run, and not just anybody, but people who would be credible.
Can I just interrupt?
Sure.
Instead of saying mainstream, can we substitute that for common sense?
Sure. Yeah. No, I agree. Common sense. Yes.
It's a nuanced little.
Yeah.
Trivial.
And actually, it's a very important point.
Okay.
It is a very important point, because common sense is not so common anymore, as we all know, right?
Yeah.
In any case, as we were going, I was convinced that David Eby and the NDP would go early for an election. Mm-hmm. Because we were divided between the Liberals and the Conservatives. The Liberals, of course, had called themselves the United Party by this point and tried to, have fun with soccer balls. I mean, whatever. But we were divided. And if they had to drop the writ, when I thought they would have, which would have been introduce a budget and then go to an election in the spring of 2024, they would have won a supermajority, and we would have been divided and fighting it out afterwards. But for whatever reason, David Eby in his arrogance decided that nope, he was going to stick with the election date. Hallelujah. So it allowed us to continue to build. But in the meantime, because I was so convinced that they would drop the writ early, I was scrambling, trying to put candidates in place. And so our vetting process was less than spectacular.
But you admit that, though.
Yeah, I was. I mean, that's just what it was.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
There's no hiding it.
There wasn't any way else I could have done it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The circumstances being what they were, that's the only path that was available in terms of process. And so anyway, we went through, and ultimately, we were having some of these conversations with the BC Liberals, and they were just being so unrealistic about their future and where things were. They said, we'll allow you to run in 6 seats, and we'll allow all of our MLAs to run, and then you guys can have the next 22 ridings to run in it, or whatever it was. It's
like tantamount to saying remove the letter C from the alphabet and maybe we'll talk.
Yeah. It was going nowhere. It was nonsense,
Yeah.
right? So we just told them, forget it. Like, no. And because I also knew that the money had stopped flowing into their organization, but they were still spending way too much. They were going to go bankrupt, which ultimately they did, which is why Kevin Falcon pulled the pin on their campaign, because they were over $1 million in debt. They'd used up all the money that was in the riding accounts, which is a no-no. You don't do that. And that was all about to come out. And so he had no choice but to pull the pin. Yeah. Anyway, so then we get into it. We all just about win the election. There was all kinds of factors, the independence, the atmospheric river, the Conservatives to fire John Rustad, which was a bogus site that the BC United had actually ran and fighting against me even during the election. All of this stuff was going on, but we didn't quite make it there. And so the question is sort of what happened after that. And the challenge is, look, I made tons of mistakes. I'm first to admit it. But the challenge in all of that was we had a contingent of BC Liberals that I brought into the party, which were kind of looking for revenge because I'd killed their party.
I think that you're being generous when you say that. So kind of.
Yeah. So there was a little bit of that going on. I don't want to throw these people under the bus because politics is politics, right? It's just what it is.
Yeah.
Then there was a contingent on the far right of the Conservative Party that were angry because I had allowed Liberals to come in. And the funny thing is, the Liberals and that group teamed up together to get rid of me. And so over the course of the year, this plotted and this played out as things go. But I made lots of mistakes that allowed that to be reinforced and that side of things. And, it is what it is. So, which is why, when I stepped down in December of 2024, I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. Just is what it is. It's politics, right? I mean, I recognize I made mistakes. And so it's also why today I'm still very engaged and involved with the party and want to see it grow and want to see us become government, because it was never about me to begin with. I was never, I don't have this massive ego that most leaders do. To me, this was about what we needed to do for British Columbians, what we needed to do to get change. I want to retire here. I want to live here. I want to stay here. If we carry on with what we're doing with the current government, I question whether I should do that. So I want change.
I'll ask you a question.
Sure.
How much do you think your ascension to leadership and the way things transpired had to tied into where your riding was geographically? Meaning that had you been, a metropolitan John, as opposed to Prince George John, would that made of, you understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. Well, so name me this. Has there ever been a premier from Northern BC?
Think so.
No. Closest is the Bennetts out of Kelowna.
Yeah.
And interim leader for the NDP out from Prince Rupert.
Right.
He was just there for a few months, right? So I mean,
it's an uphill battle.
So there's that, right? I mean, so there's and everybody calls it the rural-urban divide. That's bullshit. I'm sorry for using that language,
You don't have
but
to
it
be
is.
sorry for
It's garbage.
Yeah.
Because there isn't a divide. When you look at what people want, it's the same. It's just how they want it from one side versus another side, and how they look at the world is different. When you talk about common sense, I would suggest there's a lot more of it north of Hope than there is south of Hope.
I'll agree.
And I'll give you an example. So back in 2007, I think it was 2007 in that range, there was a big ice storm in British Columbia. It knocked out power all over the place, all over the province. And in my riding, several areas in my riding, it was several weeks before the power could get brought back on. And when the crew showed up, people would come out with their power saws and their equipment and say, how can we help you get this done? Mm-hmm. That was the approach that people took in my riding. And on Vancouver Island, it was people came out and said, when are you going to get this done?
And screamed and hollered and
it's the difference. It's just the difference between the two, right? And part of that is because it's rural living. You've got to be able to come together. You've got to cool, like all these sort of things. People are different in terms of their thinking, but they all want the same. They all want to be able to, succeed. They want to be able to retire. They want to be able to have a life for their kids. They want to be able to have health care. They want to be able to have services. It's all the same. Mm-hmm. There's none of this divide. It's just, there's a different approach thinking people get, roll up their sleeves and get it done up in the north because they have to, there's no choice. Whereas down south, we are far more dependent on government trying to do many of these things for us.
Mm-hmm. And perception becomes people's reality, and the fact that they don't believe. Like I always use this on the license plate in Manitoba. It always says "Friendly Manitoba," and I come from Manitoba. It is friendly. It's friendly Manitoba.
As long as you love mosquitoes, it's good.
That's right. Mosquitoes and minus 35 in the wintertime. It's and I can make fun of it. And one of the best days of my life on numerous occasions was seeing that city in my rearview mirror. Because
I've only been to Winnipeg once, and
summer or winter.
Summer, well, actually, spring. I was there in spring.
So just in time
and
for all the roads.
I was there for one of the ministers' meetings across Canada.
Okay. You know what? Listen, God love the people in Winnipeg and Manitoba. It's a fact. It is. And I have not. And you are not allowed to shit on Manitoba unless you live there or have been there or spent some time. And I grew up there. And I listen. God loved them.
I tell you what, I was asked once during the election campaign, saying, "What's your favorite place in British Columbia?" And I didn't have an answer. And I love my riding, obviously for a whole wide variety of reasons. But I've been all over this province, and I have to say that there's beauty in every corner of it. There's value in every corner, but there's also problems in every corner of it. And you know what? I've been across the country. I haven't been to every province yet. One of these days I want to be able to do that. But I see the same thing in all the other provinces that I've been to, whether it's Saskatchewan, whether it's Alberta, whether it's Manitoba, whether it's Ontario, whether it's Quebec, right? Whether it's up in the territories. There is huge beauty in all of it. And if we chose to look at the things that are bad, okay, that's the way you want to look at life. If we want to look at the things that are good, that's a different way of looking at life. And I'd prefer to look at the positives. I guess you could say I'm an optimist in many ways.
So let's just jump ahead here and get into the. We talked a little bit about John, the politician, before he was the politician. We talked about the Conservative Party under your leadership. We haven't. There's one big glaring thing here: the candid look at where the NDP government has, in your view, gone wrong. But always with a follow-up, what would you do instead? And we could spend 4 or 5 hours talking about that. But one of the big things that when we initially met and we talked about was Indigenous land claims.
Yes.
Okay. And that's something that has been, it's been on the burner. Multiple provincial governments have kicked the can down the road. You had that portfolio for a while. Correct?
I signed 435 agreements.
Yeah. What happened?
So let's take a step back, just a brief moment on the NDP and sort of what went wrong. The problem that you have with governments is, of course, what's the first goal of a government? Just get reelected. Right? What's the first goal in opposition? To get elected.
Yes.
As government. And it's, I hate to say it that way as politics. They don't like to degrade the people or the process, but that is just the reality. And so for the NDP, how did they get elected? Well, they know that their approach cannot win an election because from an economic perspective, because if people are focused on the economy, they aren't the party. So how did they get elected? Well, what they try to do is they look at where do they get votes? Well, they get votes from unionized workers. They get votes from government workers. So they dramatically increase spending, dramatically increase the size of the public service because they look at that and say the vast majority of those people will vote for the NDP. Then they also look at everything that they're involved in, whether that's childcare, whether that's other type of services. How do they unionize that? Because that is going to create more pool to vote for them. And so they don't think about how do we get an economy to grow. They don't think about how do we have families succeed. They don't think about how do we strengthen communities. They only think about how do they get a vote. Okay. And so that's where they go wrong. Okay. And that's why we have massive deficits and government has ballooned.
$10.5 billion.
And they don't care about services or any of the rest of this kind of stuff. Well, it's 13.3 or whatever. 13.5. We'll see. And it'll be more than that when the time comes. Right?
Well, let's just wait for the FIFA bill to come through.
Yeah, exactly. But in any case, so that's where they go wrong. So now the Indigenous issue. So this is a real problem. And it was described to me when I was minister as the elephant in the room. You can't get a strong economy. You can't get mines open. You can't, have a strong forestry sector. You can't do oil and gas. You can't even build warehouses and build out AI. You can't do anything unless you resolve the problems or the issues with Indigenous folks. And so when I first took over the file in 2013, we had, I think, 18 what was called non-treaty agreements in British Columbia. And I was given a mandate to sign 10 more. And I thought, how on earth am I going to do this? I mean, in all those years, we've only had 18. Mm-hmm. You want me to sign 10 more? Anyway, I ended up signing 435. But the point of it being is all of this was all about how you work through what First Nations are looking for and use the leverages that you can within government to try to achieve what they're looking for and to try to achieve what you're looking for. So it's all this negotiation. It's all this process that you go through. It's very time consuming. And so when I started this and started the work.
But there's a key word. I'm going to interrupt you again. I apologize. Negotiation.
Yes, exactly. It's a key word.
Negotiation.
But it's also not just about one-on-one or government to government, but it's also about how you bring the public involved and get them engaged.
Transparency.
So that people can see what you're doing.
Yes.
And it was after the first winter of being elected or first summer of being the minister and sitting with all the business leaders and the premier and around, and we were talking about, the things that need to be done. And they came to the premier and said, the first thing you need to do is triple John's budget. I looked at them and then they explained why. I said, because we can't do anything unless that's solved. Now, the premier didn't triple my budget, but it was the business community realized this has to be
dealt with. Needed to be dealt with.
And so now we fast forward now to what the NDP are doing, and now they've brought in this DRIPA, and they brought in UNDRIP. DRIPA meaning the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People Act. UNDRIP is the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. And so what this has done is it's really raised the expectations of First Nations. And it has cemented that they should co-govern the province. So now we're in a situation with what the province is doing. They deny this, but in reality, this is what they're doing. You can't make a decision unless the First Nations agree. They have to have consensus. Now, ultimately, they'll say, no, we still have the ability to make the final decision, and they do, but they won't make it because they don't want to go against the First Nations. Okay. And so we now have 204 First Nations in BC that are co-managing what we do in the landscape. Now, you might think, okay, you can do that, but the problem is they don't get along. And so they don't, one group may want to do it, and the other group may not want to do it, and so they can't agree because they would be supporting the other group's claim, and it's all this nonsense. And it freezes up the ability to do anything.
The other caveat that I want to put on this discussion here too is because I know in the comments, and I don't read comments, but my wife does, and that this is an Indigenous scrap that we're blaming First Nations. There is no.
I don't blame First Nations for this at all.
And I want to make that clear.
Yeah. And so do I, because I do not blame First Nations. They didn't have the ability to hire a lawyer. They didn't have the legal ability to hire a lawyer until the 1950s. They didn't have the right to vote in British Columbia until the 1960s. They didn't have the right to carry on with their ceremonies and cultural activities because it was stripped from them back in the,
Yes.
until the 1920s and 30s or whatever it was. In any case, there's lots of things that we're going to, but when you boil it down and look at it today, the problem is they still live under the Indian Act, and the Indian Act is basically just pure socialism.
Oh yeah, it's
pure
just
socialism.
It's a horrible piece.
Well, but it's pure socialism. Yeah. Government will rule everything that you do. It's the federal government that owns the land. It's the federal government that approves your budgets. The federal government that you have to go to allow you to do.
What percentage of people even know that Indian Act exists? It's
many.
Infinitesimal.
Not many. It's small. So you got this. So this is the environment that these people live under. They've been held back economically and socially for many, many decades, ever since Canada formed. They've been held back. They've been isolated. They've been moved anywhere they were in the way. They got moved to other areas. I mean, it's just the way they've been treated was horrible. I'll give you an example in my riding. So the Cheslatta carrier people were living in an area, and in the 1950s we built the Kenny Dam on the Nechako River, which was going to flood this old area, which was primarily where the Cheslatta carrier nation people were. There was somebody who went through their villages and gave them notice and said, you all have to move. The flood's coming. Your area's going to be flooded in 2 weeks. You have to leave.
Isn't that lovely?
No consultation, no engagement, and they just had to move. And then, of course, they burned all the buildings. They got rid of all the structures, before the flood came in. That's how we looked at First Nations back in our history. And so the problem is now, how do we reconcile that history with where we are today, where we've got, 300,000 Indigenous people, 100,000 those roughly are Métis, 200,000 they might have a lands claim in BC versus 5.5 million non-Indigenous people. How do you reconcile that past?
And you have 243 bands?
204 bands, yeah.
204 bands, all to a certain extent looking at things from a different perspective.
Well, all looking at it thinking like they've all been treated the same way.
Yeah, but...
And they're looking at it thinking... And so now they've got this window of opportunity because of DRIPA and UNDRIP. And so now they're in the driver's seat with all these things going on. And it's creating this environment which is uninvestable in British Columbia. Mm. So we have to figure out, how do we reconcile that past and bring the people together to actually be able to build a future going forward? And their vision is it's all their land. They should be making all the decisions. Well, that doesn't work because... You got, first of all, they don't agree with each other.
But did you expect them to say anything less?
Of course not.
Of course not.
Of course not. So the question becomes, what does that path look like? How do you achieve this so that we can actually unleash the economic potential? You look at British Columbia today, we have trillions, that's with a T, trillions of dollars worth of natural gas. We have billions, if not more, in oil that we don't even take out of the ground in British Columbia. We have, all the mines and resources you can want. There are 17 mines that could open up, in the next 5 years if we actually allowed them to go. And we had port capacity, the rest of the kind of stuff. I mean, we should be an economic powerhouse. We should be one of the wealthiest nations. We should be like Norway with trillions of dollars in a heritage fund. This is who we could be as British Columbia, but we just keep getting in our own way. But if we're going to solve our budget problem, if we're going to solve being able to provide services and support for seniors, if we're going to solve, our crime and the drugs on the street, we have to get the economy open. And which brings it back to the elephant in the room. You can't do that until you can figure out a path to deal with reconciliation. Okay. And that's why this is so critical. And it's why I'm actually giving a complete rethink in terms of what we should try to achieve with reconciliation, as opposed to, I don't think we can go back to what I was doing 10 years ago as minister when we signed all these agreements and we opened up pipelines and all this kind of stuff. I don't think we can get there anymore. I think we have to think of a different path.
Would it help if the idea of reconciliation was articulated to a standard that everyone understood what that meant?
I don't think it's possible.
You think it's impossible?
No. Because if I ask you what reconciliation means, if I ask 100 people, they're all going to have a different idea.
Yeah, you're right.
Some people are saying,
we
shouldn't be doing anything at all. And other people are saying, no, it's all ours. And so ultimately, I don't think we should try to define that as much. But what we do need to do is we can't let this go on forever. We actually need to conclude reconciliation.
Okay.
This can't be this ongoing process that grows and expands and changes and evolves. No, because if that's the case, you never achieve
So
reconciliation.
what's the first step towards that?
Well, the first step towards doing that is to sit down and have an honest conversation. What do we need to actually do?
Okay.
Like, what is it that the province wants? What is it the First Nations wants? And understand that you're going to be in opposite corners.
Mm-hmm.
So
But you also have
something
to
that
have two
negotiates through?
parties, though, that want that. And I don't believe that our current provincial government wants that.
No, they don't. They like
Sorry to
this.
point my finger at
No,
you.
no, that's okay. They actually like this process going on, because that's why they introduced DRIPA. That's why they're changing all of our laws. That's why they introduced UNDRIP. That's why they're stripping away rights of non-Indigenous people. Right? They actually want this, and so this is going to be this ever evolving. And if you ask them, what are you trying to achieve in an end result, they refuse to tell you because they don't know. They just want it to carry on.
They don't know. Are they in? Are they? Well, you would.
Or is there something nefarious?
Exactly.
Some plan.
That's my.
There's an old saying which is never attribute cleverness where incompetence could more easily explain it. I would suggest it's more incompetence. They don't know what they're doing.
They don't know what they're doing, because it sure as hell seems like they don't. So okay. We've looked at this. We've talked about the indigenous land issues. We have to negotiate. We have to do that in a transparent way.
Now, let's just take a step back. Some people say, why do we have to negotiate? And it's important to understand this.
Yes.
So we have, of course, in our Constitution, Section 35, which has enshrined Aboriginal rights in the Constitution, and that includes title. And so back in 1982, when that was put in the Constitution, everybody asked, what the hell does it mean? And the answer was, it's an empty vessel of law that the courts will fill. Well, and the courts have been filling it. And so this is now the foundation of huge problems. But even that is not the foundation. You have to go back even hundreds of years ago. The British North American Act and the Doctrine of Discovery and all this kind of stuff. The Americans solved this problem by declaring First Nations sovereign states. And then declaring war on them and wiping them out.
That's exactly it.
And I'm not suggesting that's the path. Obviously, that was
what they chose.
That's the path they chose.
That's what they did.
And what we did is we said, no, we're going to cooperate. We're going to work together with First Nations, which partly because Canada needed First Nations support to survive with the big brother down
throw a little
south of the border.
My father worked for the Department of Indian Affairs for 27 years.
There you go.
Okay, so I know a little bit about it.
Yeah. So in any case, then what we tried to do is we decided, okay, we'll do treaties with First Nations. And so but that kind of stopped at the Alberta border at the Rockies.
And I never even knew. I didn't know this until probably, I'm going to say, 2 years ago.
Yep.
Dumb me.
And that's why British Columbia has all these problems.
Yeah.
However, I would suggest that the rest of the country is going to be in for an eye-opener at some point, because it's not going to take long before some First Nation challenges that historic treaty and says we were taken advantage of.
Yeah.
And we surrendered our Section 35 rights without knowing what we were doing, and so this should be null and void. And a court's going to say, we agree.
Yeah.
That's coming for the rest of the country. So they're going to have, but regardless of that, like I say, it still doesn't negate the fact that we have to conclude reconciliation and we have to find a path that allows us to be able to actually prosper as a people in this province and understand and fully realize our heritage and potential.
So that starts with an election and getting rid of these bums.
Yeah, I would suggest, because clearly they're not interested in that.
They're not interested in it.
Yep.
So that's an interesting way for me to segue into the next topic.
Well, you don't want to keep around down this one? I mean, come on. It's like I say, this, I have to admit, I'll just take a step back. In 2013, after the 2013 election, and I'm sitting with Christy Clark and we're talking about, the future, and I'm telling people about, what the portfolios are, and she comes to me and says, I'd like you to take on Aboriginal relations and reconciliation. And of course, my immediate answer was, I'd be honored. Thank you, Premier. Looking forward to the work. In the back of my head, I was thinking, you got to be effing kidding me. You want me to do this file? That was the thought that was in my head. But no, you get asked to do something, so you do the best you can.
Yeah. And you honestly, the thing is that the interesting thing, about politics is that everyone that I know that gets involved in politics gets involved for the right, I'll say most. And when I say the right reason, I think they do because they believe they can make a difference.
Yep. Well, the one thing, the real big thing that drove me into politics, of course, because I was so intimately involved in the forest sector, is that I wanted to see changes to the forest sector.
Yeah. So you think?
Well, I've been working on it for
difference.
21 years, and I still haven't be able to get the changes in the forest sector, right? Because it hasn't been the highest priority of the governments that I've been involved in.
Yeah. So let's do a little sort of turn here. This latest leadership run we had here. I'm going to make a general comment here that because I'm a card-carrying member of the BC Conservative Party of British Columbia, and I was trying to register to vote, and I gave up halfway through. My wife didn't, she just stopped. I gave up halfway through. They still allowed me with my credentials. And what was kind of ironic was that it's more difficult to register as a card-carrying member to vote than it is to get into the country, which was like I was just, because that's the way my mind thinks, okay? Yeah. And it got to the point John, where I was prepared to pay them $100 to stop phoning me. And to stop text messaging me, to stop sending emails, to stop sending all the shit, the harassment.
The harassment was something else.
It was
it turned off a lot of people.
It was just too much.
But the problem is, and this is the world we live in today. We are so plugged into social media. We're so plugged in with our phones that it's too easy to
and the cost. There was nothing. There's no cost.
And it's minimal cost to do these things. So you can only do so much touring. You can only go out and see so many people.
Yeah.
And so this is how you connect with people. And it is. I don't know how to solve that problem. I don't. Mm-hmm. I wish I had an answer. Short of what my wife did, which she just refused to answer any phone calls, and she just automatically deleted all the emails. And
that's what my wife did.
And she's still annoyed.
Yeah, annoyed.
But she wasn't annoyed because she didn't have to talk to anybody. Yeah. She just refused to answer any calls.
It was just and I'm sure at some point I agreed to. I pushed a button or whatever the hell that was. Now, what I'm sitting here now going, are you guys selling my data? Like, what are you doing? Kind of thing. I hope that's not happening, and I don't believe it is, and I'm not saying it is. Okay, but let's
tell you what. Data integrity is a real problem, and it's not just I'm not just talking about the leadership race. I'm talking about just in general terms. How do you end up getting all these phone calls? Or emails from various organizations, scams, et cetera. How do they get your numbers and stuff? Because somebody has sold your data.
Yes.
Now, it's not necessarily a political party. It could be anything, right? But there is a value that's attached to it.
It's a serious situation that needs to be addressed.
And I know
no one is.
And this is one of the biggest problems I had when I was building the Conservative Party was the integrity of our data. Because there were people who had access to the data who downloaded those lists. Now, we asked them to destroy them, and they said they did, but did they?
You don't know they did or didn't.
There's no way to verify it.
Yeah.
So
what do you do?
I don't know. I mean, so what do I do? To report them all to the police? But this is a problem.
It's a serious issue.
It's a serious issue, and it's one of the reasons why I also believe that British Columbia should have its own data centers and manage our own data. We don't. All of our data, all of our health data, all of our records stuff, they're all down in the States.
That's problematic.
Yeah, I have a problem with that.
Yeah,
and I argued that with the current government. I argued that with the previous government.
Does anybody seem to give a shit?
And the argument is it was too costly to do it in British Columbia, so we're taking the lowest bid. And so IBM or whoever it is that provides that service has all of that data, and it promises that they won't share it or use it. Okay. So we have to take them on that promise.
Okay. Let's get to the.
However, two elections.
Okay.
To the two leadership elections. I often wonder, is instead of going through this process of registering and all that kind of stuff, whether we should be thinking about doing things differently. And that's right from registering for a political party, whether or not that should be done through a third party entirely, similar to the States where you're Republican, you're independent, you're conservative, you're a Democrat, whether we should be doing that approach as opposed to this mass signups and all this kinds of stuff in terms of how we do leadership races and nominations, so that it becomes, more of a, stated record. That could be done in British Columbia, and that would solve a lot of these kind of issues, the mass memberships, all the nonsense that goes on. So that's one thing we should look at. The other thing, I look at is, okay, so I'm not a big fan of online voting. I'm not a big fan of mail-in ballots. I think we need to get rid of all that stuff. I actually am a big fan of showing up and showing your ID and voting. Proving this is you. See, here's me, here's my ID.
There's an argument for that.
All of our BC ID should have a C on it if you're a Canadian citizen.
Yeah.
If you're not, you have to produce a document that shows you're a Canadian citizen to give you the right to vote, so that we get rid of all this nonsense. Because I know in the last election, I know many cases where people who are not Canadian citizens voted. They even received voting cards from Elections BC.
I'm going to ask you a question. How many MSP cards do we have?
Or when MSP, of course, doesn't exist anymore.
Whatever you want to call it,
but
the medical services plan.
There was
before
we moved it to our driver's license, where it's now on the back of your driver's license.
I got two.
Yeah, back before then, there was 4.5 million people in BC, and there was over 8 million MSP cards.
So has anybody ever done a reconciliation with regards to that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Or does it's just
not
nobody
that I'm aware
gives a shit? Like, it's just, has that been brought up in the ledge?
It has, and I think that's why they're converting it over to a driver's license, and so if over time, right, all this stuff moves over. The idea would be to phase it out over time, instead of spending a bunch of time hunting it all down.
Okay. So, leadership. Any shocks? Any surprises? Any? What did John Rustad think of the overall? Let's look at it from 60,000 feet first.
Yeah,
what did you?
So I'll say this: like, leadership races by their nature are very divisive,
of course,
right? And because everybody signs up because they've got their favorite, and everybody gets involved because they got their favorite. The thing that I guess you could say was disappointing. It wasn't disappointing is not the right word, but I would have liked to have seen a candidate get in the high 30s on the first ballot, because then it's pretty clear how that's going to go. But when you have a candidate that the highest candidate was 30%, and then there was one at 20 and one at 25 kind of thing, you look at it and think, okay, well, this is really divided now, and it's going to be really tight, which it was. Exactly. And so that's and it's not wrong. It can't be done a different way. But what it means is that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that everybody feels welcome and part of the party, as opposed to looking at it and saying, my candidate didn't get elected, so I'm going to take my toys and I'm going to go home.
I don't want to misquote an individual who ran and did eventually win, and I'm probably going to take a lot of shit for saying this, but that someone said that we're not a big tent party.
I haven't heard that. So
that
may be out there. I haven't seen that.
That we're not, our tent is pretty small.
Look, people in British Columbia need to realize that. Look at the federal results. Okay, we are 32 to 38% conservative. We are 16 to 24% liberal. We are whatever the percentage is NDP federally. Now, they changed, obviously, because the federal NDP were such a horrible party. But regardless of that, that's roughly where the numbers are, which means about 1/3 of the province is NDP and about 2/3 of the province is not, is something else. And so, however, when you look at it, there isn't enough conservative to win a majority. There isn't enough liberal to vote for a majority. There's not enough NDP to form a majority. So there is always going to be a big tent on either side, whether that's NDP or whether that's the center-right party. Today it's conservative. If I used to be BC Liberal, it used to be SoCred. There's always going to be that where you have to pull those people over to one side or another.
But I just find the last thing that we should be doing is alienating a potential voter.
Of course.
And I think out of the gate, we begin to do that. I don't know if it's like Izzy Asper used to say this, and because he's he's a Manitoba businessman, he did very successful businessman. He used to say about politics, so and in business, say whatever you have to do to get in, and once you're in, do whatever you want. He used to that rather than now. I'm not necessarily saying that.
Look, the Socred's formula. When they were in power from 1952 to 1972, and then 75 through to 1991. So the most successful political party in BC's history. Social credit.
Yeah.
And their motto was always the same. You campaign in the middle, you govern on the right. So you campaign in the middle about these things, but then when you're making decisions, it was more on the conservative side in terms of how those decisions are made. And that's the formula. So this whole idea that you have to come out and be this, on the politics of this side or on that side, I just think it's all nonsense. I mean, quite frankly, and I said this publicly, I could give a rat's ass. What I want is common sense. I want just to fight for the average everyday person and do what's right. And to me, that is obviously getting stuff done that's more on the right side of center, obviously, in terms of what
and grow and like we're sitting on this mass economic
potential
that we don't even I don't like. Well, it's frustrating as
people
hell.
don't, so I remember back 15 years ago, 12, 14 years ago, that we did an event in front of the legislature, and we had a whole bunch of university students come in, and we're talking about this was how we were changing, training and all this kind of stuff. And I remember talking to one of the students, and the student said to me, "Oh my God, we've got to stop fracking. We've got to stop extracting natural gas in British Columbia." And I turned to the student and said, "You do realize that natural gas pays for all of our cardiac surgeries and services in British Columbia?" They stopped and looked at me, and I said, "Yeah. Where else do you think the money comes from? For those services that are needed." And he said, I never thought of that. I was never taught that in school."
Well, that's a problem.
And it's a problem. Our education system is a real problem.
It is a
both in K to 12 as well as in post-secondary.
I'm not going to disagree with that at all. But so when we talk about where we are, we just finished off. We have a new leader. Our expectation is that there at some time there has to be an election called.
By the way, that likely isn't going to be before 2028.
It would
be highly unusual. I mean, David Eby's polls numbers are so bad. The NDP is in such rough shape right now that I don't think
it's
they can
going to
even
be him either.
Dream of going. It won't be David Eby. He's going to be gone.
He'll be gone.
And it's a funny little thing. You think, why wouldn't they get rid of him right now? I mean, he's so unpopular. And they have a problem. You see, most people don't realize that when you take out a membership in the NDP, that membership is full federal and provincial. They're one and the same parties.
I know that.
Yeah. So if you're an NDP member, you're an NDP member federally and provincially. That's why they share all the information. That's why they share
John, you're
all the
a wealth
stuff
of
like
knowledge,
this.
Man.
Well, I've been around a little while. But
so okay.
This is a problem because they just elected Adi Lewis, who is sort of this radical left.
Radical, crazy.
Well, I'll try to be as kind as I can in my words, right, in terms of it. But the problem is all that membership that voted that is the membership that's in the provincial party right now.
Yeah.
And so they don't want to have a leadership race because they're worried about what that'll look like.
Yeah. So we're gonna be stuck with this for quite a while. So our course of action is to get prepared.
Yes. To keep building, and that's so. When I met with Kerry-Lynne and congratulated her on her win in the leadership. I said,
I'll say it's publicly too. Congratulations, Kerry-Lynne.
Yeah, no, congratulations. All the best. Yeah, and so
really do.
I met, and of course, it can always be a challenge having a previous leader in your tent because there's you're taking it in a new direction, you're doing your thing, and the previous leader might have some influence or decide they want to try to. I just said, look, I've said all that aside. I already said that back in December. I'm here for one reason only. I mean, first of all, to serve the people in my riding and carry on with that work. But it's to make sure that we continue to build the Conservative Party and we get elected in the next election, we bring an end to the NDP. That's it. And however I can help you do that, that is what I will do. Whatever you want me to be doing. Because at the end of the day, we have to have this change. If we want to see, the open opportunities that I think we can see there. Too many of our youth see no future in this province.
Well, where did the in the title in conservative where did the word conserve get lost? My father was a conservative, a big proud member of Ducks Unlimited.
Yep. I've been supporting ducks for years.
Yeah, and
one of the reasons why I want to move through the No Loss of Wetland Act. And my former riding president and his wife, and tragically they died because of a car accident. He was head of Ducks Unlimited Canada. He was very involved Ducks Unlimited BC, and so I tried to move forward this, and I'm going to keep pushing this whole idea where, and this is now going down a rabbit hole. Sorry, but it's we obviously are going to be impacting wetlands when we do development. And it doesn't say that you can't do that, but it just says if you're going to be impacting wetland, there should be no net loss. So where do you repair, where do you increase wetlands somewhere else so that there is no net loss in BC? And it's just a simple little act that I want to put in place, on behalf of my former riding president and her wife, but also, to support Ducks Unlimited.
But the thing is that conservatives conserve.
Yeah.
We conserve things. We're not wasteful. That's that.
But it's interesting. Sometime, and maybe we should do this on a different podcast because this will take too long. We should really talk about the word liberal and liberalism and conservative and conservatism, because they have flipped on their heads from what their original meanings were centuries ago.
I'm writing it down. We got a couple of things here. We got the golf one too. Okay.
There's a number of things. I imagine we can go into all kinds of topics.
But the thing is, the one thing like I said to you before, this is a conversation.
Yep.
Okay. We're talking. And I do believe that if we had a bit more of this, I believe that a lot of the things that we talk about, we could solve if there was the wherewithal or the genuine desire to solve things. But I think that my own personal belief is that we have a provincial government that doesn't want to solve a lot of things.
So, everybody has described politics over the decades as a bell curve, where the vast majority of people are somewhere in the middle, and you've got the extremes out on the left and right. And that has been true for many decades. However, I don't believe it's true today. I actually think it's a double hump. It's like a camel's back, where we have more polarization today than we've had in many decades on both the left and the right, to the place where ideology means more than standing for what's right and getting things done. And so you've got fewer people left in the center and more people on the left and right in terms of, and then you still have the fringes out on either side. And I think historically this has happened before. I don't think this is new. And I think it's over periods of time. You look at, for example, how many civil wars the Roman Empire had in various ages, throughout time. And I think what ends up happening is people get drawn apart into ideology until you end up with some sort of conflict or, economic depression, whatever the case may be, that then brings people back together again and back into that middle, being able to compromise and get things done. And so unfortunately, we're just in that period of time right now. Yeah. And
that during that period of time also, it's not just all negative.
No.
It creates, there's opportunity that's created.
Oh, I think so too. And like I say, but it
needs to be recognized and nourished.
So maybe I know we're getting long here in terms of this, but when you look at the platform that I put together for the last election for the Conservative Party, and you think, okay, well, we want to double food production, we want energy, we need to refine more products for use in British Columbia, we need to be independent of our electricity generation, all this kind of stuff. All that sounds good. And it's the things that we need to do to open up our economy and stuff. But why was that? Why was that the case? The reason I put that together, and I never talked about this publicly, was because I can see what was going on in the world. And we're vulnerable. we don't produce enough energy for ourselves. We don't produce enough food for ourselves, or refine enough energy for ourselves. We don't produce enough food for ourselves. And so if there's any disruption going on because of other jurisdictions, whether it's policy or other type of conflicts, we're vulnerable. And I thought this is wrong. We should never be vulnerable as a province. We have too much to offer the world, let alone our own people. How is it that we could put ourselves in a position where we'd be vulnerable?
Okay, so John, I want to end on some kind of lighthearted notes.
Sure.
Okay. And one of them is I want you to, what's the craziest thing you've ever seen in the legislature? What's you've been around for a while. What's the wackiest, craziest things? You don't have to name names.
There are many stories. Many stories.
What's the craziest thing
And I'll just maybe give a little bit of insight. And this is just a fun little moment, and I'm going to use a name actually.
Okay.
As part of it. And there's lots of crazy stuff that's gone on, lots of things. So, but the one little fun thing, question period is always this theater, right?
Yeah.
It's question period, not answer period, right? And so all the theatrics play out in terms of it. And there was one time a question was asked, and by the NDP. I was in government at the time, right? And they asked this question, and ultimately it was around housing. But the way they started out was talking about, kind of seniors and care and all this kind of stuff. But the question was about housing, and our housing minister, our health minister, stood up to take the question. It was George Abbott at the time, and colleagues were sitting beside him, pulled him back down, and said, "George, it's our question not for you, right?" The housing minister got up and answered the question, and I went over to George afterwards and I said, "George, what are you doing? Like standing up to answer a question when the question wasn't for you?" And without missing a beat, he looked at me and said, "Never let the question get in the way of a good answer."
That's good. That's pretty good. That's pretty damn good. That's pretty good. On that note, okay, this has been a warm and honest and insightful conversation. Okay, I mean that, John, and I appreciate you so much coming on here, talking to. I say this. It's kind of self-deprecating about what I'm doing here with this podcast, because it feeds this curiosity that I have, and it gives me the opportunity to talk to people that I find interesting. I'm not suggesting that I don't care what other people think, but it's me talking to you and we're having a conversation. One of the reasons I like golf is because I can golf as a single and I can walk for 4.5 hours and talk to somebody that I've never met. And it's interesting. Okay.
Yep.
So I genuinely appreciate you coming and giving us the opportunity to learn a little bit more about John, the man, the politician. There is more to it. You have family. There's a lot of other things that we could have covered. And I wanted there's an open invitation for you to come back again. Okay. I don't believe that we have enough of these conversations, and this is, and I know they're long, we've been talking for over an hour. Okay. We could talk for another hour. We could talk for another 2 hours about things. And I know people have the attention span. Some people have the attention span of a fly. And we try and put things into bite-sized things because there are things that people need to know. And
this is the rule about politics.
Yeah.
If you haven't got your message out in the first 20 seconds, you failed.
Yeah, you're right.
Right. And then that hooks them, and maybe you get 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And maybe from that you get somebody that'll go back and look at it and see the whole thing.
Because we could have spent the whole hour talking about the leadership race. Well, but why?
And quite frankly, I should have started off by saying something absolutely outrageous right at the very beginning to hook everybody into it. But that's not my personality. That's not your
personality, and you got to be who you are. So on that note, I'd like to encourage everyone to subscribe to Ship of Fools, where wit meets wisdom. We are up on Spotify. We're up on YouTube, all the streaming platforms, and we are genuinely curious here. The statement that I did make at the very beginning is I believe that talking about things, no matter what anybody says, the more educated you are on a subject, I believe the closer you come to a solution to it.
The biggest thing I could encourage is something that it's not original, that I've heard from other people in the past, which is this: if you really want to understand something, make sure you can argue both sides of the argument.
Yes, 100% true.
Because otherwise, if you just hear what you want to hear, you're not going to have the depth that you really should have to understand an issue. whatever that issue may
I
be.
appreciate you, John. And like I said, I do not want these to be interviews. They're conversations. And I felt we had a conversation, and it was a damn good conversation.
It was fun. I enjoyed it. Thank
Lots
you for
of
having
fun.
me on.
And you know what? We're going to talk about golf. We're going to bring you back on. We're going to talk about golf.
I'd love to do
I
that.
didn't realize that you were a golfer.
I got a couple of stories I could tell.
That's fantastic.
especially
So on that
Take
note, thank you so much. I appreciate you. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
You may be asking yourself, what's any of this got to do with me? Absolutely nothing. Until next time.